Hello and welcome to episode 62 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. This week's guest is Victor Krummenacher. Victor's probably best known as being the bass player in the band Camper Van Beethoven, but he's also got an enormous body of solo work. He was the bass player and sometimes guitar player in the band Monks of Doom. He's in the band The Third Mind. He's had a lot of collaborations with a lot of really brilliant people. He's a really brilliant guy himself. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride, welcome. Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who survived anxiety, depression, trauma, addiction, other forms of mental illness, and mental distress. The idea was that if we could get together and have honest conversations about what was really bothering us, we'd start to recognize our sadness in others and maybe start to get better. As I record this, it's August 3rd, 2020. Many of us are entering our 143rd or more day of quarantine and the COVID-19 epidemic. I hope that if you're listening to this one day in the distant future, you're looking back and saying, man, that was a grim time. I'm so glad that's over. Victor and I talk a lot about the quarantine and the epidemic and how we're coping. I've talked to a lot of other musicians. Some of you have contacted me through the email, which is crashandride@protonmail.com, and talked about how you're holding up. I know it's been really hard for a lot of people, especially people with anxiety and depression already. If you didn't have it already, I know some folks are experiencing it for the first time. It sucks, man. I know so many musicians who, as of like 4 days ago, are getting no more money from pandemic unemployment assistance. So we're all just kind of twisting in the wind. I know a lot of folks are starting to sell off their gear, which, man, that's the hardest thing. And yeah. If you know someone you think would be a good guest on the show, or if you'd be a good guest, hit that email, crashandride@protonmail.com, especially if you're a woman or person of color. As I said last week, my guests kind of leans hard on white guys with guitars. That's because I'm a white guy who plays drums, and I've been in 8 million bands with white guys with guitars, but I feel like that's not the only story that needs to be told, so I'd love to hear from you next week. Our interview's with Mary Eleanor Joyce. She's an amazing drummer and multi-instrumentalist that's played in a bunch of really good Athens bands, Maximum Busy Muscle, Shitty Candy and the Circus Peanuts, The Incendiaries, which is a tremendously influential all-woman band that was also really extraordinary and spun off some really amazing bands. That should be out next Saturday at midnight. Couple of quick announcements. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster based here in Athens, Georgia. They have a special espresso blend named after the podcast. You can get Crash and Ride espresso, whole bean or ground in cans from our website at crashandridepodcast.com, or I'd actually prefer now that you buy it from my friend Seth Hendershot, who has Hendershot's Coffee here in Athens. Seth is a local musician who has a great coffee shop. Hendershot's Coffee is a great place to read, to write, to study. It's also a really nice live music venue after dark. I've played there a dozen times or more, and COVID-19 has hit places that involve like one-to-one interaction really hard, especially small businesses. And so they're sort of expanding their business out to their website so that you can order cans of coffee and other merchant. You know what? Let's just give Seth a call. All right, hang on here.
Hello.
Hey, buddy. It's Patrick.
Hey, Patrick, how's it going?
Hey, man. Good. I was just cutting the intro to this week's episode, and I've been saying lately, hey, look, if you want to get Crash and Ride Espresso, you can get it from my website, but I'd prefer you get it from Seth because they're, trying to keep the doors open at Hendershot's Coffee. I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to call Seth. How's it going?
It's going all right, man. Just plugging away, selling what I can, selling lots of cans, selling lots of cups, selling lots of T-shirts, stickers, the whole bit.
So you guys you have patio service in Athens, right?
That's right. Yeah. People are able to hang out on the patio. We've got the tables distanced in a safe way where you can use the internet. I mean, it's, you can stand the heat and just hang on the patio.
It is July, or now it's August in Georgia. If someone wants to get stuff off the website, what's the website?
The website is hendershotsathens.com. And you just go to our virtual online store, and we've got all our goodies up on there, most especially whole bean and ground coffee.
You got the Crash and Ride Espresso and also 33 and 45 RPM, is that right?
It's 45 and 78.
Oh, that's
33
right.
is coming. 33 is coming very soon. That's actually going to be a light roast.
Oh, cool. And, of course, there's like Hendershots T-shirts and stickers and stuff like that.
Absolutely. In addition to that, there's a couple of local bands, coffees, Kishibashi's Oniyari coffee, which is made in conjunction with his new record and documentary about Japanese internment. Really heavy, cool stuff, beautiful music, and wonderful coffee. And then we've got the Widespread Panic collector's cane, got the coffee there as well, and Tinder Core vinyl, everybody's favorite vinyl press.
Don't you play with Kishibashi?
I did for a couple of years, man. It was really fantastic. The touring schedule got to be a little much for, being a father, husband, business owner. But, man, the time I got to spend with them was really incredible.
Yeah, he's extraordinarily talented. Well, man, I don't want to keep you, but I just want to let folks know that's hendershotsathens.com, HenderShotsAthens.com, and you can get all manner of Athens-related coffees and Hendershots paraphernalia, and you can support local music, support local coffee shop, and help keep Hendershots open.
Beautiful, man. Thanks. We'll have some live streaming shows coming very soon with some of your favorite Athens bands and solo artists.
I will announce those on the podcast.
I appreciate you so much, man.
Thanks, man. Totally not surprising that guy's house is absolutely bathed in music. He's the real deal and a really good guy. I would encourage you to support whatever he's doing. That's HenderShotsAthens.com. All right, Victor Krummenacher. I first met Victor when the band 5/8, a band I've been in for like 30 years now. We opened for the Monks of Doom back in the 90s when they were touring after he left Cracker. And we ran into them a few times after that on the road, and then there was a terrible accident that cut short his 90s touring for a few years, and we talk about that some in the interview. And I remember hearing about it and just how shocking it was, and that whole last Monks of Doom tour was kind of cursed. We talk about that some in the interview. When I called Victor, he was packing boxes to move from San Francisco to Portland, Oregon. He's lived in San Francisco since probably the late 80s. Sometime in mid-Camper Van Beethoven time, I think he moved to San Francisco from Santa Cruz. So he's undergoing like a really profound life change, and I really am grateful for the time he gave us. At the time he's considering this enormous like change of venue, but also during the course of this interview, there were like federal troops who were fighting in the streets with Black Lives Matter protesters in Portland, Oregon, in what is probably the biggest stress test of the American Constitution in our history since the Civil War, at least. So it's a really interesting time to be uprooting your entire life. And I really am grateful for Victor for giving us the time to do this interview. Let's jump into our interview with Victor Krummenacher. Yeah. I mean, this is a really weird time.
Yeah, it's extremely weird.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. It's like it's just definitely a difficult. It's pretty unprecedented. Really, there's no. You can be as hyperbolic as you want, but there's nothing that I know of that even remotely compares. So.
Yeah, So you're moving to Portland like soon, right?
Yeah, so I can go get arrested by the federal police.
Yeah,
walking around.
The unaccountable.
The unaccountable, yeah.
Yeah.
They're definitely what is it, Department of Homeland Security. That we know now, but it's pretty wild. But the one statement I saw from any accountable voice at the Department of Homeland Security said that basically this is a test market case for federal properties. So that, if they feel like they need to crack heads in the coming few months, which they're probably going to have to do, this is how they're going to do it. So it's a court case, but whether or not that's effective, I don't know. We'll see right now.
It seems like there's a segment of our culture right now that refuses any accountability of any kind that might challenge their kind of privilege and comfort, and they're willing to let people die in order to protect that.
I think there's no question now that it's really come down to exactly that people are and I don't really know where the entitlement comes from, and I don't really know there's no logic that I can see behind it. But
if we start to talk about the current situation in America and kind of my perspective living in the American South and having lived here 90% of my life, and your perspective having grown up on the West Coast, I remember when we first met on Monks of Doom tour,
right,
feeling like all of you guys had come from like a different planet. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like,
right. Well,
you were wide open as people. Like, there were a lot of things I, as a 20-something Southerner, just had been like just pounded into my bones by the culture that I grew up in and the socialization that I got in Southern public schools. And I met you guys, and you were like total California dudes in the best way. Yeah. It was kind of mind expanding for me.
Well, we were not, my mom is from a small town she's from Mexico, Missouri, which is, it's not the South technically, but it's very, very Southern in its identity.
I've seen signs for Mexico, Missouri on my way to St. Louis to play.
Yeah. So she, I know that vibe, but I was born pretty much to rebel against it, I think, on a lot of levels. My dad was not from that point of view, and I don't know if I would really say in retrospect now that he was super sophisticated or intellectual, but he was smart and he was well-read. And he came from some means, and we were, the thing about like the monks and all those guys is that we were all raised either by people or in situations where having your head open, having your mind open was looked at as a good thing and looked at as something to pursue.
Yeah.
And no joke, because we all had the Santa Cruz experience. We all had the Santa Cruz experience at a time where, kind of 60s activism was still a thing. I was there in 1983 is when I moved to Santa Cruz. And, I met a lot of people who are, have been my friends now for close to 40 years who really, they took my head off and put it back on in profound ways. I have a friend whose parents were Angela Davis's lawyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Immerglick's father had studied with Carl Jung. It's like a direct, like we were directly influenced by lefty thinking because those were the parents and the parents of our peers or our parents themselves.
Sort of the whole West Coast vibe, yeah.
Yeah. and Berkeley and all of that, was really palpable on us.
Yeah. So just to contextualize this, Camper Van Beethoven moved from Redlands to Santa Cruz in 1983, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, and I just want to take a moment to back out a little bit and talk about who you are.
Sure.
There are 11 Camper albums, 7 Monks of Doom records.
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and according to the internet, you had at least 6 collaborations that were recorded with Eugene Chadbourne.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And you have 9 solo records, and then another record that is in the can right now called Silver Smoke of Dreams.
Right. I think those numbers are right.
Man, that's crazy.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't really count. And also, importantly, I think in the last year was the Third Mind, which is a project that I did with Dave Alvin and David Emmergluck and Michael Jerome, who plays drums.
Oh, I know Michael.
Plays drums for Richard. Yeah, plays drums for Richard Thompson, Better Ezra, any number of people.
Yeah.
Blind Boys, Alabama, Charlie Musselwhite.
Yeah.
And that came out in, the release date was in March, and then, that got all put on hold because of the pandemic. So, and that was a big record for me, because, I grew up watching Dave play. Dave was, Dave's been a really big influence on me as far as a songwriter, but really especially as far as a musician.
Yeah.
Because he works his idiom, but he'll work it to the furthest extent. I'm not so kind of idiomatically attached, but I like to work it hard at the edges.
Yeah.
So that was the disappointment of the year, I guess. That's the way that works.
So you grow up in Redlands, but you're exposed to Dave Alvin and the Blasters and that whole California scene. I sort of interesting to me as I try to contextualize Camper Van Beethoven and your experience. Like, I recall that first record there were like 3 records that came out in like less than 2 years, Camper records, and everyone was like, oh, they're a punk band. And yet there were so many elements of like Americana and influenced by the Dead. Like, you guys were really broad based, and I feel like that was maybe part of what made it so distinct.
Well, it's a group of really kind of stupidly intelligent people.
Yeah.
Who I don't think it's a secret. We don't always get along very well.
Yeah.
We never really did. We've been pretty cruel to each other at points, for good or for ill.
Yeah.
Probably for ill most of the time.
Yeah.
And, I think when, Lowry talks about it, he's like, anybody in the band could have had their own band, but it's just not what happened. It was an accident. I mean, Camper really was an accident. We all had more serious things we were doing that were all kind of darker and weightier and weirder, but that was the band that, I think for obvious reasons now, that grabbed people's attention, and it did immediately. I don't know what, who knows where that chemistry comes from. It's just impossible to say, but the band had chemistry immediately, and immediately became the most popular thing that we were doing, and immediately garnered all the attention that we were all looking for in our other projects. And that was both, that's basically how we made a name for ourselves. But I think also because it wasn't really the plan that people had, people get very attached to what their identities are.
Yeah.
It created this, we just had weird karma. The band has weird karma. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
And always kind of has. But I think at a certain point, certainly by the time we got back together, but I mean, in the period of time where we weren't actively playing, which at the time seemed like an eternity, but now seems kind of brief. I think there was a lot of kind of coming to terms with just what the relationships are.
Yeah. How long was that first camper run as a band?
I started playing, I literally graduated from high school and started playing with David in a band called Camper Van Beethoven and the Border Patrol. So that was June of 1983. And that ran straight through until April of 1990. So just shy of 7 years, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, we splintered in April of 90. And then the Monks basically went straight to work by the summer and kept really on the road pretty constantly until 93, at which point Emmy left to go be in the Counting Crows.
Mm-hmm. And
then, things just kind of, so, for me, it was basically like 10 straight years of just playing music all the time.
Yeah.
And then in 93, what year was it? That's when I had to kind of diversify and learn how to do other things and work.
Yeah.
Which, I'd never really, I really hadn't had to do it.
Yeah.
But I was still pretty young.
Yeah. We met
around that time.
Yeah. At the end of that arc. And I remember distinctly that we were somewhere. I think our first show was in Jacksonville Beach at I Signed a Go-Go.
I remember that show.
It was a great show. There was a power outage or something. I remember we had to stop and start again. But I don't remember all the details. But we did 10 or 15 dates together. And somewhere in the middle of that, I think you and I went for a walk somewhere. And you said, I just want to go back to San Francisco and go for a walk with my dogs down to the beach. I haven't done that in forever. And that's all I really want to do right now.
Well, yeah, that's all. At the time, my whole life had been really on the road. I remember having very distinct feelings being around people in San Francisco when I first was living there, and people who'd gone to college and had summers, right? Had like time to do things. I never had time to do anything other than play music, because that's really all I wanted to do. It's what I wanted to do, but it's when you're doing it, there's always a grass is greener kind of perspective. And then the Monks schedule, particularly just to make a living, because we were really hand to mouth by that point.
Yeah,
like Camper, we were making real money. By the end of it, I was making, for me, what was real money.
Yeah, probably
really dollar for dollar, not far from what I make now. And I was young. I was not even 25. But the Monks was not that. The Monks was really hand to mouth.
Yeah.
My whole life was hand to mouth. And to make it work, it was not less than 100 days a year out, 100 shows. And I know one year was like 125, 150.
Yeah. 5/8 was doing around 200 a year at that point. So
yeah, and it just and also the Monks did 4 records in 3 years.
Yeah.
So and we rehearsed all the time. So when we were home, we weren't touring. We rehearsed. That band rehearsed every day.
You would have had to. Those songs were complex. It was like a prog band almost prog power pop band.
Yeah, and it was also, when I listen to it now, it's like it's almost too tight. Like I don't want to be as tight as that.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's too wound up. But man, that band could play. And there's a lot of discipline, as much as and that band fought too, though, in a very different way. We really are, it's a closer band of brothers in a certain way. It's not as spiky with Jonathan and David not around.
Yeah.
And that's in some ways good, in some ways bad. There's sometimes some benefit to having a spike, but there's a real camaraderie to that. But there's a certain energy with that particular 4. I can't get it anywhere else. And it's something, it's still one of the most special things to me. It's certainly the weirdest band I've been in consistently. But it also aged. It would seem really awkward at the time. But the weird thing was, is when that band started playing again, it's like, wow, this actually aged better than I thought it would.
Yeah.
And I think we were all surprised by that.
I want to talk a little bit about those first few years with Camper, though, because
Sure.
you start a band with friends, and sometimes they're not even super close friends, but there's a spark, things start happening, and it's so different, I think, being inside it than it is for anybody on the outside to imagine what it's like to make that many creative decisions and that many personal decisions, and you are constantly having to weigh your own needs versus the needs of everybody else in this organization. And, at first it starts out with a band of 4 people or 5 people, but then it becomes a band with 4 or 5 people and their significant others, and eventually their children and your management company.
Right.
And it's just every decision is freighted with the expectations and needs of other people. And one unreasonable person in that environment becomes torturous.
Yeah.
And if you have more than one unreasonable person, then you're basically chained to this money-making machine that is killing you.
On some levels, knowing people who've been through it, when you have, the weight, I have close friends I work with frequently who are in far larger organizations than I am, where it really isn't just a band. It is an organization with employees and salaries and families and, not little mortgages, big mortgages to deal with. And the creative decisions are, for sure affected by it. And the work is definitely affected by it.
Yeah.
In some situations, there's financial reward. In most of the situations there is, significant financial reward, but there's a price on both sides of it,
Yeah.
And, Camper built into an organization when we were very young. Well, I was young, I'm 5 years younger than David, right? And so I think there's a lot that happens, especially when you're younger. 5 years is a pretty significant difference. And, David is just the kind of person who will just give himself up to the cause. He just will. And I'm not really, when it comes down to it. I'll assert a boundary when I have to.
So I want to define that for people who aren't familiar with what you mean when you say gives himself up for the cause. Because if a band is making money and you put out a record and you're on a major label, which you guys were,
right,
the expectation is that you will tour for the next year in the United States and then do another 8 to 10 months in the rest of the world. So there's 2 years of your life.
Well, yeah.
That is and that means I remember in the year 1990, I think it was 5, we played a show New Year's Eve in Athens, Georgia, and then we played June 3rd, which is just after my birthday, and I slept in my own bed 3 times. And we weren't even a big band. So I remember days of working for REM when they were here, helping them get ready to get out of town, and they would be packing for the next 2 years of their lives. So for someone like Dave to say, all right, sure, 2 years of touring, sounds great. And if you're not on board with that, which sounds like you were trying to set some kind of boundaries, like, hey, you know what, I'm a human being who has dogs and a life and a house, and I'd like to maybe go home every now and then. The pressure from the organization is huge in that situation.
Yeah, well, there's always a lot of pressure to just, fold in and go for it and shut up and not complain. And that was always, I think that's that's a difference between, I think between David and I specifically. I think David was raised in the church. So you just do what you do, right?
Right.
But it didn't account for David's thing is just suck it up and do it. And there was a lot of, personal trauma that had gone on during that period of time for many people in the band, and not, me probably more than most of them. And I needed to pay attention to that. And, I think camper is one of the first real experiences where I understood that really to survive and thrive, I would have to say no, which is very unpopular.
Yeah.
It just was what it was what it was.
Yeah.
And, I put my head down hard for other projects, but it's been interesting as I work with other people. Like, I think a primary difference, like in the camper universe at the time, maybe not so much now, but definitely at the time, like David would do any interview, any radio appearance, anything. He would do literally anything. And, being older, that's actually, when you're young, that's kind of the time to do it. But being older, sometimes he'll still, when we're on the road, want to push in ways that I don't think are, healthy for people approaching 60 or over 60. And when I have worked with other people who have been road dogs for that period of time, self-protection has now kind of entered as being important. And like, no, I don't do, like, I'm not doing that interview, or you structure it in such a way that you do it all like we're doing it now, and you do it from home when it's convenient and get as much of it out of the way. But, you're like, the show is sacrosanct. Like, in order to pull a good show, right, you do everything to protect the show.
Right. So let's contextualize that for people who haven't done this kind of touring. So, you're reporting for duty at sound check around 2:30 or 3 o'clock. You're there for a couple of hours.
Well, and in our case, you've driven in.
Yeah.
So,
right.
You've driven at minimum 200 miles, sometimes more like 4. This depends on where you are.
Right. And so you're on stage from 10:30 or so until after midnight. There's a little bit of spin down time. You're probably getting to bed 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
If you're lucky.
And the expectation is that you're going to pop up to get on the morning drive show in the next town. So so you're going to call into a radio show at 8 o'clock in the morning. And if it's a different time zone, it's going to be even earlier for you if you're going west. And that means 4 or 5 hours of sleep to promote a show. And,
if you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're lucky.
And depends on how you travel.
Yeah.
And if you're on a bus, sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. It all depends. But, most of my touring has not been in a bus. I mean, a good chunk of it has been, but most of it hasn't. Yeah,
Monks of Doom, you guys were in like an Econoline or something.
Dodge.
Yeah.
Just because we were on the Dodge team, but not that it matters that much now. But yeah. And that, that really, that's a young man's game. There's no way I would consent to doing that now. No way.
Yeah.
The show's where I make it or break it. And so that's become, I get pretty grousy now, and I have to do shit that I don't really feel like is pertinent to doing a show. And it doesn't mean that I don't want to do the promotion attached to it. I do, but I want it done in different ways. You have to defend that at a certain point, and that I'm at the age where it's like I'm going to defend it. But again, like now it's all kind of hypothetical because I don't know what the road is anymore.
Yeah, nobody knows what happens next. Like, even if you get a vaccine and it's X% effective, but someone goes to a Foo Fighters show or Psychedelic Furs show or Camper Van Beethoven show and contracts the virus, and there's some way that they can establish that I wasn't sick before I went, and then I went to the show, and then X days later I got sick. Like, who's on the hook for that? Whose liability? Like, this is the kind of conversation that's happening at the management and promotions level. Like, how does live music go forward from here?
I'm well aware, so I don't know, and that's what's interesting about just like having this particular conversation is like our context has changed so much. I don't even know, I think we're all really faced with some pretty profound reinvention right now, which is, I don't know even, I'm going to miss doing what I used to do. And in many ways I already do quite intensely, but, I think sometimes reinvention is not the worst thing that people are faced with. So it's not going to be the same.
Well, that's interesting because it brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was the end of that 10 years of constant touring at the end of Monks of Doom, when you had to reinvent and find a new way to make a living. A lot of people, I think, who maybe haven't gotten to that point in their lives as creative people, as touring rock and rollers or whatever, or have never experienced it, don't know how liberating it is for someone to say, hey, how'd you like to work 8 hours a day?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
I think.
I remember sitting in a cafe in Louisville, Kentucky, at the end of the 5 or 6 years of 5/8 doing 200 shows a year, and someone elbowed me in the ribs and pointed at this guy who was washing dishes, and they said, hey, that's the drummer from King Kong, which at the time was a pretty successful sort of college indie rock band from Louisville. And they were like, he's washing dishes. And there was this it was a local person. They were being kind of smug about it. And I was like, yeah, but he sleeps in his bed tonight.
Right.
Tomorrow morning, he's going to make coffee in his coffee maker and maybe get to pet a dog,
Yeah. It's devil's bargain. That's really what you're contending with. And I think, I used to have this argument with my ex-brother-in-law all the time, who just thought, what I was doing was probably, the easiest thing in the world. And there was no explaining it to him because he just didn't want to hear that it wasn't, and never would be and never really had been. And, I had friends who were music teachers. I got an upright bass teacher who played bass for Charlie Parker.
No shit. What was his name?
His name is Ted Wald. I think he's still alive, actually.
Wow.
He was very young when he played for Parker. And I think he's up in Washington State now. He's got to be... I think he is still alive, but he's got to be pushing 90. And, he's a black guy touring the South with Charlie Parker in the late 40s, early 50s. And, so he had the added impediment of race in America. But what they did, the way they toured, what they were doing, it was the same. It's the same insanity.
Yeah.
That, it was the same thing, but with vehicles that weren't, it's like tying upright bass to the outside of the station wagon and then driving through a snowstorm.
Yeah.
So that's just a different, it's just a different thing, but it was never, the road was never easy. And the road is really, because I was talking about this with some pretty smart friends yesterday. We had this kind of Friday afternoon, pandemic phone call that we do. The road is a fairly recent reinvention. It's really a post-war, maybe to some degree pre-war, but even pre-war it was more residencies. So, you would travel.
Yeah.
I'd say in the 20s, traveling began. Post-World War I, it probably began, but they were residencies. So you would go to a hotel and you would play in the ballroom and you would be in the hotel for a week or 2 weeks, right?
Right.
You would be in towns for extended periods of time. And the residency idea actually really persisted for really until the 70s, almost the early 70s is when you see the transition really going to one night stands. And then really where that transitions is that as larger markets became kind of the norm, as rock and roll became super popular and moved into what we would now call a shed, it became industrialized, really. And so in the 60s, you're playing what were essentially big band ballrooms. There were ballrooms that were built in the 20s and 30s, sometimes earlier, but usually 20s and 30s. And they were really there to facilitate, band culture. And I mean, by band, I'm talking big band, large bands, large ensembles, and dancing, right?
Yeah,
and then it industrializes into people not dancing, but coming to consume rock and roll, sitting in a seat and buying a beer. And that really establishes in the 70s. And that's that era of the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and, The Who would be like the transition. Led Zeppelin really led that charge, but that those management companies certainly, like, so it'd be like Bill Curbishley, Peter Grant, whoever handled the Eagles, which would be like David Geffen, the people who did like the band and the Dylan tours and all that stuff. It becomes industrialized and it turns into a night on the road. Like you go on, like you pack it up and you move, and you go to the next place. So
Yeah.
A, both exploit as many markets as possible, and B, really make money. Exploit markets and make money is really basically one reason: to make money, and cash in. And when we started on the road, like the touring scene, as you and I knew it, was just really actually getting established. It really didn't exist. And who really, I think, deserves credit for making it exist is Black Flag and REM. And I think those are really literally the two bands, more than any others I can think of, that established, the alternative rock circuit. And because it didn't really exist. It was regional.
I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah. It was due to the sort of relentless touring of REM and Black Flag that there were, like, there used to be you probably remember this, the book Book Your Own Life, the DIY Bible that Maximum Rock and Roll kind of spun off.
Well, it was Ray Farrell and Spot at SST who literally gave us, like, the SST radio list and the venue list.
Yeah.
And that's how we booked our first tours, is that we got it directly from Ray. And then, I met Peter and Michael about, I guess, exactly 35, because I was just talking with Jefferson, I think it was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
That we met in Santa Cruz, and they had a network as well. And Frank Riley, who was friends, I forget her name, she booked like New Order and the birthday party and all that stuff. She was in New York. She got hit by a cab. I can't remember. I think her name is Ruth. She died a long time ago, probably 85, 86. She got hit by a cab and was killed. But she was like she and Frank were kind of the East Coast anchors as far as people who were, quote, booking agents, right?
Yeah.
And they were just establishing this network of venues and stringing them together along with college radio. And the record companies who, we were still in an era where you were, breeding bands, right? You were grooming bands, and the record companies looked at this as a viable economy of scale, right? So they kind of codified it, right? So REM did the legwork. They were ostensibly independent with IRS, but IRS was really an arm of A&M. But REM had always, were very, those guys were always very independent.
Right.
Which was the great thing about them, because they really were, talk about like free thinking, we're going to do it our way. That band really did do it, and I've always admired them for it. But like SST were like, there were no rules at all, but Black Flag went out and started doing it, and I think they were doing it 79, 80. And like, the things like the Clash and things like that, they were actually working the same route that like the Eagles were. They were just like on a lower rung, but they were playing like 3,000, they were playing these California, like 3,000 seat places, even when they first came.
Yeah.
They're playing a Hollywood Palladium, which I think is 3,000. It's 2,500 if it's anything.
Right.
And, and that was the first time that they came to California. So, that was just a different grooming, right?
Right.
The club thing was just a different monster.
There are a few of those sort of clubs that are still going. Charlotte, North Carolina has the Milestone. It's hanging in there.
Yeah.
And Black Flag played there. You guys played there. REM played there. 5/8 played there. Like everybody played the Milestone. 688, of course, was the one in Atlanta. It closed many years ago. Yeah.
I remember it well. Yeah, but that's the thing, is like that whole aspect of the industry was, it became something that I think people just believed would kind of be the perpetuity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID has kind of proved that wrong. But I think what's interesting about it is that it proved all the economy, how the economy kind of collapsed around the music industry because of streaming. It's proved that all wrong too. And I think people are going to have to start contending with, like, if you really, like, if music is important to you, which it may not be, but if it is, you're going to have to pay for it. And how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to consume it the same way at all.
Yeah, I don't know what happens next. I mean, I have a lot of anxiety about it. I mean, I've played drums like twice since last March. I played 4 or 5 days a week the last 30 years of my life. So
sure,
it's been really weird. You mentioned Ruth, the booking agent, who got hit by a taxi. Wasn't someone in Monks of Doom hit by a car? Was it John who was the?
Well, I was in my solo band. Yeah.
Yeah, John was the percussionist for Poi Dog.
Yeah, Poi Dog Pondering. That was in '96.
Yeah.
When that was what put me off the road for a good few years.
Yeah, you guys were on tour when that happened, right?
Yeah, we're in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And we were opening for Poi Dog. My solo band was opening for Poi Dog. We got the connection from John being in Poi Dog, and my booking agent was friends with the Poi Dog agent. I guess the agent actually was Frank, come to think of it.
Yeah.
Frank Riley. But we were on tour in spring of that year. We got to St. Louis, and I had one guitar player. It's not good to tour with junkies.
Oh, that's right. We ran into each other on that tour.
He overdosed.
Yeah.
Yeah. He overdosed. Yeah. And then we sent him home. And then like 2 days later, John got hit by a car. And then I had to basically drive home with no money in my pocket, which is fun.
Was Deanne Franklin front of house on that tour?
I think Deanne was... I don't know if she was around. I think she may have been around on that tour, come to think of it.
Deanne was front of house at Slim's when I met her, when we went out to make a record in San Francisco in like 1991, and then we kept running into each other. She was front of house for Poi Dog Pond.
Oh, she was... Yeah, she was always on Deanne was like a constant presence. I haven't seen her in quite a while, but she was a constant presence.
I talked to her last week. I check in with her all the time. Yeah, she's doing great.
Is she in San Francisco still?
Oh, yeah. It's got the same house.
Oh, she stuck it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
I remember something about John was really, when he got hit by the car, he was in the hospital and he was really worried about his leather jacket, right? Is Mike misremembering that? Wasn't there like did somebody get my jacket?
Well, I mean, it may have been. May have... it was pretty traumatic for me because pretty much the accident happened in front of me. So
did happen in front of you.
There's a lot of stuff that, I think that was one of the first real introductions of understanding trauma in my life. It wasn't the first experience of trauma, but it was the first time, I had bad, I had what you would call PTSD now, or CPTSD specifically from that tour. So it was pretty influential in how it affected my understanding of well-being and mental health. It was a bad experience in a very profound way.
I don't know what CPTSD is. I know what PTSD is.
So CPTSD it's complex. Is what the C stands for. It's a C hyphen, and it's basically it essentially the manifestation of the diagnosis is about the same, but the traumatic influences are kind of more disparate. It's not like you're not like in a war necessarily.
Right.
So a PTSD diagnosis. It's more like, long-term psychological abuse. It's not a rape, right?
Right.
So like trauma is going to be, soldier in war, child who's, sexually abused, spouse who's beaten, violent occurrences.
Right.
CPTSD is going to be more mental trauma, long-term mental trauma. So CPTSD would be like an HIV survivor or that kind of thing.
Right.
Or like a tour situation would be the other like analogy for it.
Man, I've heard some tour stories where there was often a front person or someone in the organization who was absolutely tyrannical, and the effect it had on people was to not only sort of ruin that band for them, but ruin music for years.
Oh yeah, man! I know many people who've like had really horrific situations.
Yeah.
I've been around bands that make camper look like, terrorists, and I've been around bands that make camper look like, a walk in the park.
Yeah.
And
it's bad.
I mean, and I think it's all relative because, some people I know, I mean, who would have ever thought like Nick Cave would have turned out to be like a well-adjusted guy? Because, when I first met those guys and played shows with them, talk about an intense who were extremely fucked up all the time.
Yeah.
And now, he seems almost like a spiritual advisor. So,
I remember like a year or two ago, maybe longer, Steve Albini and Steve Earle kind of ended up crossing swords in the media for a minute, and Albini was like, I don't know why we elevate these ex-junkies to these positions of like perceived elder or wise person, because like to me the smart person is the one who doesn't go down that road in the first place. And I was thinking, I could see that perspective, but I also know that like the wisest people I've ever known were the ones that really just got off the road and into the weeds for a long time and came back like with no more questions about what that life holds.
I kind of hate, there's kind of two schools I really hate. One is the adulation, like, like this just pick like the Replacements as an example, which is not to pick on the Replacements because I like them a lot, but talk about a whole fucking mess of individuals, like that's a mess, right? Kind of, it's not even an open secret, right? It's like it's just like it's acknowledged fact, and I don't think there's a lot of romance. I don't think there was a lot of romance in being in that band in retrospect for a lot of people. I don't even think for Westerberg there necessarily was. I think it was just, it's like it's a compulsion for people who create it. It's just what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But to adulate it and defend it as being like this righteous thing, I think it kind of misses the point. You're just like, these people are just going to make art. People just make art, and they're going to do it however they have to do it in whatever circumstances that they find themselves. It's not noble. It's not.
It's just a thing that we have to do.
It's just art, and the art, the resonance of the art is your psychology reacting to the art.
Yeah.
Sort of pin all these expectations, and people, I think, it fundamentally actually misses the point. And I get very upset with people who are like, we'll just go to X, it's just like, well, X seems, a black helicopter Looney Tune and Billy's a trumper. And I'm like, I don't care, like I really literally do not care. Their last record was great. They're great on stage still. I just saw them recently, and they're great. They're a great rock and roll band, as viable as they ever were. And like, if you think their politics matter, it's not that I agree with Billy Zoom's politics, because I don't, but it doesn't matter to me. Like you really do, like art really has to exist in that vacuum. I'm sorry. It's really uncomfortable for people. I mean, because we're in such a polarized world, right? People are so uncomfortable with accepting people who have different beliefs. And I really think it's fundamentally a problem, because there's no way, like, it's why on a macro level, Congress doesn't work because you just can't reach across the aisle. And the more we dig down into it, you're just missing the point. To me, that's my take on it. You're just missing the point. Like you have to accept that great art. Was Francis Bacon a nice guy? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You have to accept that great art can be created and resonate and be made by monsters, because you're giving art short shrift if you can't accept that. If you can't accept that dichotomy.
I just think it might be unfair to hold everyone to the sort of personal standard that was established by someone like the guys in REM, who were essentially good people. Because I think for a lot of people, their political beliefs are a kind of set of consumer behaviors. Like, I'm going to buy this art because I endorse the politics of everybody involved in it. And I think that comes from that sort of 90s idea of shopping for a better world. Like, I'm going to boycott this product and buy this product because that is how I can have some control in the world. When in actuality, like, buying things isn't really a fundamental act of resistance,
Yeah, well, it's buying things is immaterial to what is literally immaterial to what music means to me and the function that music performs for me. It means, I do not deny economics. Like, I do not deny like money as a necessity to, it's like I'm always thinking about how to get money to make art.
Right.
So I would be a liar, but the function of art in my life, and as far as like what it really does and how I really interact with it, is, it's a pretty sacrosanct relationship. And, I don't have a lot of tolerance for like the Neil Young model, particularly where, he's had so much money since he's been 22 or whatever, that he just simply doesn't have to, abide by, certain norms that most people who have to walk on the planet in a different fashion have. It's like some people are really removed from it, and I don't necessarily want to defend it. But, Bob Dylan hasn't been a normal person since he was 19, and he's still doing fundamentally fantastic work. I mean, this last record is, to me, it's pretty mind-blowing, so, it's just to view like the consumer economics of buying music or participating in art as your political, like the way you can flex your political muscle. It's like, no, I don't think so. Like, if you really want to flex your political muscle, then go volunteer or, go participate in the process. That to me, that's really where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah. Or go be in the streets.
Yeah. It's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of people, especially middle class people. If you haven't had to really actually work activism, which many friends of mine had to really work it in the late 80s and early 90s,
right,
because their lives depended on it.
Yeah.
So I have a different context for that. Like, consuming music is not where I do it.
Yeah.
So I don't, I guess I'm more tolerant of the asshole artist is just the asshole artist. I don't care. I don't care. It's really fun. I love The Fall. I think they really, still at that band in the 1980s, it's hard for me to think of something better musically than, This Nation's Saving Grace is, to me, it's as good a record as you're gonna do. And Mark Smith, who the hell wants to defend him? He was a nightmare of a human being.
Yeah.
Or I would find him a nightmare of a human being. I'm sure, I'm not a Mark Smith expert, but I'm sure people were friends with Mark, and probably Mark was kind to them. People are kind in their context. I might have my opinions about people, but I don't want to hold. I'm not here to judge. I really don't think that's my job. And,
Yeah.
So yeah, like cancel culture and all that shit that we're dealing with now. It's like I have some real problems with it because I kind of feel like I feel like you need to be challenged. I really feel like you need to understand like the darkness. Because I think there is darkness. I think there is darkness on the right. I think we are approaching fascism. I think we are approaching like Christian fascism specifically. I would agree with Chris Hedges on that one quite a bit. But I think it's important to understand where it comes from. And I think like you, because, we brought up like the differences of being from California versus being from the South. I think you would understand like an evangelical mindset better than most people I know on the West Coast because, it's more endemic to where you're from. But again, as intolerable and as frustrating and as horrific as, the right is right now, I think without being able to have some compassion for what they've come out of, which is they've basically been neglected by everybody, and have reacted rather than reacting left, they reacted right.
Right.
This is like, the great sin of America is that, it's just basically, it's a capitalist oligarchy and it ignores everybody.
Yeah.
And so to like we use art to kind of balm our psychic day-to-day wounds, but if we expect that art or the makers of that art to have like mind, I think we're missing the point of what the art is. The art is independent to the person, right?
Yeah.
The art just does what the art does, and you need to respect the art for the art, or we have a real problem because you don't actually because the art is the culture. Like the human beings just make it, right? The art is actually the culture. And so if you're not respecting the art, you're not respecting the culture. And that's where I think when you can denigrate the culture, whether from the right or from the left, that's when you get Yugoslavia. That's when you have a super meltdown. And that's what we're in danger of doing. And that's why I think it's really important to not demonize people who make art for not, we're essentially demonizing people for not being perfect, right?
Right.
And for not being the role model that we think they should be. And I think that's just, that's why Twitter drives me fucking out of my mind.
I don't think anybody on Twitter's happy to be on Twitter, honestly.
No, I think it's like I think social media is just like there's a weird exercise in self-flagellation. I've really been trying to experiment with being off of it quite a bit. And, it's done good.
Yeah. I want to go back to St. Louis. I didn't realize that you had witnessed what happened to John. And I want to talk a little bit about how that sort of, you said that was kind of the end of the road of being a road dog for you.
Yeah. I became a road dog again later, but I took a few years away. We had been on the road for 6 weeks. We probably really had, now I would look at that tour economically and say like, no way,
Right.
But you just would, we were still at the age where you would just do these Hail Mary passes out of some kind of belief that you'd break something open.
Right.
And I think even by 96, I was like 30, 31. That's an age where like doors start to close in the music business. That's just the truth. And, it was later where I just began to understand like, well, if I want to do the solo stuff, I'm going to just do the solo stuff out of my own pocket and hopefully do other music that can pay for it. And I'm just going to do it because I want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's really how I've always functioned with it, and that's given me a lot of advantages because it's given me freedom. But the St. Louis experience specifically is, we went on the road. We had very few resources. We didn't really have a record label. We were an opening band. We were kind of currying favors because they were friends of ours, so we were making enough money to make it work. But we were, there's a particular thing about that period of time where everybody was just super hand-to-mouth. Everybody had been in most people in that band in my solo band had been in more successful bands. They were just trying to kind of keep the dream alive, really, is what it was. And That's just not the healthiest place to be, ever. And so we go and we do this, and there was basically three guitar players. I was rhythm guitar player and vocalist in that band. I had two lead guitar players. We had this kind of three guitar television influenced intertwining thing that we were trying to do, and a rhythm section, and one guitar player, when we left on tour, we knew that he, had, it was heroin essentially, but, opioids, we would say now. And it was an issue, and he was trying to be clean, and I think he took a bunch of Vicodin with him to not have to worry about scoring, and I think his dad was a doctor, and he got him a script, and, we were all, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us were doing a lot of speed just to kind of get through the slog. And that was just kind of the way it went. Going back to camper, camper used to drop acid and drive across the country. That's just kind of, it was a lot of drugs for a long time.
Right.
Maybe not heavier drugs necessarily, but, a camper definitely speed and coke started entering into it. For me, heroin started entering into it probably 89, 90. Because things were really down, and especially after camper broke up, had a summer where essentially we just sat around and sat home and drank beer and, did drugs because, nothing was happening, and that's just kind of how I dealt with it. And then, when the monks started working again, for whatever reason, I got pretty clean, relatively speaking. I don't think, didn't really quit anything until later. But the monks were busy and it was fun. I was having a good time, and it was just basically, I just didn't really need to get fucked up all the time.
Yeah.
So things were going along fine. I think where it really began to turn, Jonathan Sagal from Camper, we had reconciled as friends, and we were both living in San Francisco, and his mom died, and I can't remember what year that was, but I think it was 93. It was as the monks fell apart, I think, is when his mom died, and he was working in a bar, and I lost my band, and was working in a coffee shop, under the table, basically, designing memorial invitations because I worked in the Castro, so I was dealing with a chronic wave of people dying of HIV, and so essentially what I was dealing with day to day, because I did graphics at this coffee shop, was funeral invitations, memorial invitations, this is dominant, and resumes, right? I was resumes and memorials. It's kind of what my life was. And there was this weird kind of barter culture that went on there because we were all so completely ridiculously hand to mouth. And so somebody would need copies, and they'd come in and bring me a burrito, and I'd give them copies because I could do that, right? And then and then, burrito guy would go and say, hey, come and meet me at the bar, and I'll bring burritos to the bar, and we can drink beer. And then, you just drink beer for free, or every third beer would be free or whatever. And, we could just drink ridiculous amounts at the time. And, and then I had a friend who was a sous chef at a Michelin star restaurant, and, get me color copies and I'll give you a 4-star meal. It's just
right.
That's just how it worked.
Yeah, it still works that way in Athens.
Yeah, or change the oil on my motorcycle, and I'll get you a bunch of appetizers in a bottle of wine.
Right.
And so that's just kind of what we were. That's the culture I was living in, and I lived in that culture for years. And essentially, almost all of it was on the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of it.
Sure.
And it was cash culture.
Mm-hmm.
And in drugs to supplement, little drug income can get you, down the road if you need it. And then we wind up on the road. And so the context specifically is it was kind of a pain. The guitar player and I, he has to remain anonymous because we're friends now, and we've reconciled over it, but he was a pain in the ass at the time. Being a junkie being around a junkie is just ugly, because they need to maintain themselves and they need a lot of maintenance. And I just, it was uncomfortable having on the road. There was a lot of tension. And when he left, suddenly there was this levity, right? Because we'd stripped it down to a 4-piece, and we did a couple shows, and they were really good. And there was just some new energy because we didn't have, like, it's not like we didn't have our issues, because we certainly did, but we didn't have, somebody who had to maintain his input, his intake to function. And so we were in St. Louis, and that's where my dad's family is from. And there was a pharmacy with my family's name on it. It was a Krummenacher pharmacy in Creve Coeur, which is a suburb of St. Louis. And we went over there to take a photograph of the band in front of the sign. And John needed money and went across the street to an ATM. And I just went back there last year with the monks that we actually finally did take the photo, ironically. And my uncle's partner still is actually behind the counter in the pharmacy. He's like 92. It's crazy. But
Wow.
John went across the street to an ATM, and it's, like suburban St. Louis. So it's not like it's like a 4-lane semi-highway street, right? You know the sort.
Yeah.
You like Broad Street in Athens as you go to the west side of town. It's like, it's not really a street. It's more like a highway running through,
Yeah.
So anyhow, he went across the street, and he's jaywalking, and he gets across, and he gets the ATM in front, and he's coming back out, and he's walking across the street, and I see him come out, and he walks out, and basically there's a car turning left out of the parking lot that didn't see him as he was walking out, and it hit him broadside, and he flew, and he landed on his head.
Ooh.
And so I didn't see the impact of him being hit, but I turned around in time to see him land on his head. So he landed in the street, and we were actually with Brent, I can't remember his name exactly, he was the bass player in Poi Dog at the time. He and John had struck up a pretty tight friendship. And Brent's like, very close to John. He sees John get hit. He screams. He runs over. And I'm like, don't touch him. You can't touch him. Because I'd seen him land on his head and just didn't know the extent of the injury. So he's, really badly hurt. And he's laying on the street bleeding. And, we just kind of formed a semicircle around him because we wanted to block traffic. And somebody parked a car so people would have to go around him. And there was a woman there. Her name, I just remember her first name. Her name was Loretta, and she was African-American, and she was a minister's wife, so she was out of church. And she grabbed Brent and put him in a bear hug and said, "You have to calm down for your friend." And then she grabbed everybody's hand and just started praying. And I'm about as not religious as you can get, but which, was always like surreal because I've dealt with death close up a few times. And, I don't really approach it this way, but that's cool. That's what you got to do. Let's pray.
Yeah.
And, they came and put John on the ambulance. Ironically, he went to, St. John's Mercy Medical, which is where my cousin was an anesthesiologist. And I called my cousin and said, this guy's coming in, and he's a friend of mine. And he was like, "Don't worry, we'll take care of him." And they did, and they wrote a lot off the hospital bill, and they took care of him, I think, pretty well. But he was really hurt, and he was in a lot of pain for a long time. And I helped take him to doctor's appointments after the accident when we got back to San Francisco for the rehab. He was in St. Louis for a month.
Yeah, that's what I recall.
Hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, for quite some time. And, it was just a very dark time, and I felt responsible, and we had to get home, which was a mess in its own right. The whole trip home for the remaining band members to drive from St. Louis to San Francisco with like virtually no money. It's just brutal on a lot of levels. And I got home, and our bass player was this guy, Chris Ethos, who's a close friend of mine, who was the bass player in King Missile. And Chris lost his job for going out on this tour. And it was just like, he just came home with like a hunk of nothing, like nothing good. And a person almost dead, right? And so, I mean, because John really, you know, it was close. He really, like, you know, had the car hit harder, it had his head harder, you know. I mean, it would have all been over, right? And it was just, like, I really had to ask myself, is this worth this, right? And I've had to ask that a few times subsequently, but not in as dire a way. But I think it is important for people to understand. It's just like, it's not, you know, people die playing music a lot, not a little bit, like a lot. I know a lot of musicians who are dead.
Yeah.
A lot of suicide or drug abuse, some accidents, some just like, you know, living hard and, you know, body doesn't like it, you know, and you have to accept it. Like, you have to, I think it's a good thing on some levels because it really does make you actually contend with your mortality. But, you know, especially when you're on the younger side of it, you know, it's like it seems unreal. But I think that was, you know, because of being a gay man living in San Francisco, I dealt with mortality a lot. I dealt with it all, you know, profoundly. I mean, you know, it's like the pandemic has definitely brought back a lot of memories of dealing with HIV, you know, pre-treatment, pre-med. And so there's a point where you have to really accept, you know, is a wiser, I would say, wiser friend of mine who's dealt with a lot of mortality has told me, you know, it's just like, age is a real thing. Like, you have to give deference to mortality at a certain point. And that specifically was the point where I began to understand it. But I was still pretty young, you know?
Yeah.
And it took a few more beatings, I think, really, to begin to rethink it. And so now, like, really the primary tension in my life when, like, touring is an active thing is, like, self-care is a mechanism, you know, because I haven't always been great at it, you know, and it's really easy for me to fall off the wagon of self-care, you know, when things get miserable. And I'm at an age where that can be a really bad mistake. Right? So I, you know, like, I like touring, you know, I mean, I do drink now. Like, I didn't drink for a long time, but I haven't done drugs in years and years and years. Well, since 1996. But, you know, I like touring sober. I like being around sober people when I tour. I like having, you know, like, I work with a lot of clean and sober people and prefer it, frankly. Like, if I'm going to go on the road, I want to know that there's somebody who's in the program actively. Like, I feel like it's an important thing to have around.
Yeah.
I just do.
Yeah.
You know, because people will just wallow in the misery of the job, right? So easily, and it's just so easily, you know, it's just easy to do. And there's, like, misery in company when you go to the bar, and, you know, it's just like, I can see it, you know, and so it's just, you know, it's better to kind of be a loner and, like, just go back on the bus and go to sleep, but it's really hard to do because it's like, it's kind of miserable, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and so that's my, you know, I guess that's what I've learned at this point. But yeah, 96 was a very profound year for me. That's really where I went and got a real job and just said, nah, I gotta back off. You know, if I'm going to survive this, if I'm going to survive this, I got to back off.
It seems like at that moment of it seems like the moment of John being hit by the car, there was this sort of cumulative trauma Of
Oh yeah, it was
all
definitely cumulative.
all the battles with Camper, all the sacrifice, all the misery, all the self-destruction, and then the sort of attempt to rebuild with a different band with a bunch of guys who are also trying to rebuild with a different band. And like there was a moment where it was like, okay, I've got to address all of this trauma from all these previous years, and I've got to like have a life with some routine and a regular income. And like it seems like that was sort of the moment that you started over as a you're a graphic designer now, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, primarily, my job is, graphic design, project management.
Yeah.
I'm really more on the management side of it. But yeah, I work with creative people, and I tell them when they have to be done with their shit, or I design shit. It kind of depends on what job it is. But yeah, that's what I do.
And yet, you've still managed to put out 9 solo albums.
Well, because I think that applies to, as I said, we were kind of getting more philosophical, like what is music to you part of the conversation. I mean, music to me is how I process things. Like what's happened since the pandemic happened. Like I did a record that came out a year ago called Blue Pacific, which is kind of, I did these 2 records that were really kind of wrapped. I got divorced, right? And there was a whole long, divorce is like a 5-year process. If somebody tells you it's not, they are lying to you. And, these records that were like kind of encompass the whole thing from like the dissolution of a relationship to trying to get over and through to the other side of the relationship. And, they were super autobiographical and, they were well reviewed. I don't know, I don't know how much like I put into it. It's just kind of how I was processing. I just process my life by writing songs and making music.
Yeah.
And so when the pandemic came around, I had a licensing deal slated for Benelux in Germany, for Blue Pacific. And the distributor asked me if I could record one more song as like a digital single to help, because I was going to go on tour in October and do a short solo acoustic tour of Europe. And I was like, yeah, I got something sitting around. I haven't been writing much, really. I've just really been on the road. I left San Francisco in 2018 and began working freelance, which meant I could work on the road a lot. I could really just kind of go out. Obviously that's kind of come to an end now, but that's, I spent the last 2 years, I made the Third Mon record with Dave. We put the Monks record out. We toured that quite a bit. A lot of camper touring.
Yeah, so at some point you've reconciled with Dave Lowry.
Yeah, I don't know. Reconcile is a strong word, but I give him shit about it. He knows how I feel, and he'd like to. I think he'd like to sweep it all under the rug, but I'll never let him do it. And I could really, if that doesn't work, then it doesn't work. I just,
But you guys have got to a point where you can work together.
I love him dearly. I really do.
Yeah.
I really think the world of the guy, and he drives me absolutely up the fucking wall.
Yeah.
He's a difficult motherfucker, and charismatic, and like a great songwriter, and he's really more now. I feel like he's just a fucking great singer. He's really, really something. And he's written all these beautiful songs that have they're magnificently resonant.
Mm-hmm.
But he definitely has a way of looking at the world that I do not agree with a lot of the time.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. And yet, for as difficult as I find him, I think that the relationship is just so long. It's just like, what's the Ray Davies line? Like, he's an asshole, but he's my asshole.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure that, I've definitely hurt David. I've definitely said mean things that I know he he's sensitive, and and I've really transgressed, and I think he's forgiven some shit that he wouldn't necessarily have to. So I got to give him some credit.
Yeah.
But I think we're just actually designed to wind each other up. But I think actually, again, to go back to the band, I like bands. Like this perfection in bands, or like we're all supposed to be one way or whatever. It's like, it's not how it works. Like Camper wouldn't be what it is if we really got along. Like the monks really get along. Right? We really do get along, and it's a different thing, and it goes in a different direction.
Yeah.
But Camper just wouldn't be what it is if it was perfect. It just wouldn't. It wouldn't be, and I will say this, it's like, I think it would be very hard for the way we're thinking right now. I think it would be virtually impossible for us to make a record right now.
Yeah.
Because I just think it would be warfare.
Yeah.
But on stage earlier this year, I mean, it was just smoking. And I think part of that is just, there's so much kind of like inner fuck you, like interpersonal fuck you going on.
Right.
Because, it's not just, it's not just David. I mean, Jonathan, who I consider really, to be honestly, one of my best friends in the world. You would talk about insufferable. Like, that dude can really drive me up the wall. And he knows it too. It's like, and I guess my whole thing is like, I'm at a point where it's unimportant to get into the details of like, why I think David can be an asshole or why I think Jonathan can be an asshole. Because I just don't, it's nobody's business.
Yeah.
But I'm fine with people knowing that I feel like they can be very difficult people.
Yeah.
But I will quickly counter that with I love them both dearly.
Yeah. Hey, Crash and Ride would like to let you know about a new industry-wide initiative focused on mental health called Backline. Backline is a hub for artists, industry professionals, and their families to quickly and easily access mental health and wellness resources. Backline has partnered with leading support organizations and care providers to streamline access to services specifically geared towards the music industry. Go to www.backline.care to get the support that you need to thrive both on and off the road. The way that Backline works is you contact them via their website or their 800 number, and they will connect you with a caseworker. That caseworker will be familiar with resources in your area to get you the mental health care that you need. If you need to talk to a therapist, they can put you in touch with a therapist. If you need to talk to a psychiatrist and be evaluated for meds, they have a list of psychiatrists. They have resources for inpatient therapy. They can put you in touch with sober companions. If you need someone to travel with you while you're on the road and help you stay out of trouble, Backline is a really end-to-end comprehensive solution for people who are struggling in the music industry. Now, a little closer to home, if you're in the Athens, Georgia area and you're a musician struggling with anxiety and depression, you can contact Nucci Space at 706-227-1515 or go to nuci.org. That's nucci.org. Nucci Space is a nonprofit musicians resource focused on suicide prevention. Here's how Nucci's works. If you contact them and you say, hey, look, I'm in crisis, whether you're a musician or not, they'll connect you with resources in the Athens, Georgia area. If you're a musician, that health care will be subsidized. In my own case, I was able to see a counselor for $15 or $20 a session. If you're not a musician, they'll do their best to connect you with low-cost or sliding scale options for mental health care in Athens. Nucci Space provides a lot of resources for musicians in the Athens area. They have low-cost practice spaces. They have a gear sale where they're constantly selling secondhand gear. They've got a low-cost recording studio. They're really just an amazing asset to the Athens, Georgia music scene, but their primary mission is helping people who are depressed or anxious get better. Go to nuci.org, that's nucci.org, or call 706-227-1515. And finally, no matter where you are, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression and you're contemplating self-harm, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. They have trained volunteers to help get you through your crisis and get you the help that you need. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. I pulled you off topic. You were talking about the Benelux deal for Blue Pacific, and
right. Well, so I hadn't planned on making a record this year. I hadn't planned on doing anything, but I wound up home with not a lot of work because I was supposed to be on the road for 2 months. And it was always deciding what to do, which was basically relocate to Portland. Because I sold a house and I had a chunk of change sitting in the bank, and it was just like, can I get a mortgage, which was a hurdle, but I managed to do it. But while I was sitting around trying to figure out what to do, and also we really didn't know, and I'm staying with my mom who's 86, and in March, it's like, can people go outside? Like, how does this work? We don't, it was so completely bizarrely uncertain. I just was like, I'm just going to plant here and stay for a couple of months. And so I went down to the storage space and got a couple of microphones out and just started writing, and wound up with an hour plus of music. So really, what I'm trying to say is that's how my mind grapples with things as a writer. It's just it goes through, and there's always a guitar around. That's just kind of how I live. There's usually a guitar in every room, and I was coming on Neil Young earlier, but, I think he's always had that, if you read Smokey, which, I don't know how reliable any biography of Neil Young actually is, but apparently, if the song comes, Neil's just going to sit down and write the song right then and there.
You mean Shaky?
Or Shaky, yeah. Whatever.
He's kind of a smoky dude, as I understand. So, well,
he was a smoky dude. That I know. That I'd witnessed, actually.
Yeah.
Really, profoundly smoky sometimes.
Yeah. So I was sort of interested in, on your website, you talk about Silver Smoke of Dreams as this project that has been created and done in lockdown, but you're so emphatic about, if you have other financial concerns, just do that. Don't
fucking help me. I'm a homeowner. I have a mortgage, but I own half of it now. So, I'm in way better shape than a lot of people, but I have a budget, right, that I have to adhere to. So I don't really have money. Normally how it works is the graphics and project management work pay the mortgage and pay for the dog and pay for the car. Mm-hmm. And the music money, if it's really good, it buys toys, and if it's just okay, it pays for recording.
Yeah.
For the last couple of years, it's been really great, actually. I had a couple of really good years playing music because I was on the road a lot. But right now that income's completely stopped. So I'm not quite sure, how I get this record done. We're fiddling with ideas of small business administration loans and things like that right now, because I paid enough taxes as a self-employed individual, and I don't feel bad about taking anything from the federal government, especially considering the state of the federal government. So, but but it really comes down to I know a lot of people who are hurting way more than I am, and part of it is, if you pay me, if you give me money to make the record, it doesn't go to me; it goes to other people.
It goes to the studio.
It goes to the studio. It goes to it goes to my mix engineer, and it goes to musicians who play on it. Because I've never not paid. You always get paid. It might be $50, but you always get paid. Yeah. Everybody gets paid. It's just the rule. I'm the last person to get paid, and so that's just but again, we're in uncharted territory for sure.
For sure.
And I don't. I mean, it's profound enough for me to like be moving and like, I'm gonna have to go like out into this wacky job market and go and like campaign because I think I got to go W-2 again for a while. And we'll just see how the hell that plays out. I'll be okay because I have some resources, but I know a lot of musicians who got nothing, like nothing. I don't know what the fuck they're gonna do. I really don't, and I don't. I don't want to be super negative, but I think the way the pandemic's playing out in the United States, particularly, I don't even think 2021 is going to happen right now. I would be quite surprised if regular touring starts happening. Touring as we've known it happens in 2021. I would be stunned. Because the country is just too polarized.
Yeah.
And really unwilling to actually look at the science of what's going on, which is that you can't be in small rooms drinking, and you can't not wear a mask, and you can't go to the beach with 5,000 other people, and you can't go to a sporting event, and you can't go to church, and you can't go to a funeral. Like, you can't do that stuff and expect it to be okay.
I want to talk to you a little bit about you began sort of clawing your way back from 1996 forward, and you clearly in a good place now. Like, are you doing therapy? Do you meditate? Like, are you like a person who does a lot of exercise, or like how?
Well, I went to the gym, like, I mean, as I got older, it's the really like blasted out workouts, but, usually 4 or 5 days a week. In the last couple of years and more, it's like I screwed up my back pretty good at one point, and and there was surgery, and I've got a knee that's also probably due for surgery at a certain point. I'm just at that point where things are blowing out. But
didn't you have an SVT?
Oh yeah, for many years.
Yeah, I remember you having a full 810, which, if you're wondering what happened to your back.
Well, I know what happened to my back. Yeah, I had two, and for a long time I had like the 1971 model, which didn't even have like the slant back cab. You couldn't roll it on. You couldn't roll it on two wheels. In other words, it was totally crazy. But man, it's like still. If I had like a crew of valves, man.
Yeah, nothing sounds like that. It's the only thing that sounds like that. The full 810. And the lead microwave amp.
Yeah, no. Well, actually, I mean, like the dream rig for me is like an SVT and a high watt. With a 4x12 with a guitar cabinet next to it. Like you blend the two together, and it's just like it's like sawing people's heads off. But nobody I know wants to play that loud anymore because they're all deaf. I mean, we have some real hearing issues in our crew, and we weren't even that loud a band.
Yeah.
So
you meditate every day?
But yeah, I meditate. I do a 10-minute thing usually, sometimes longer, depending. I usually meditate in the evening too. Yoga. Usually not like a big long. I'll like once or twice a week I'll do like a 45 or 50-minute thing, but I usually do just because I get really stiff. I have a lot of tendonitis issues, and just in order to be flexible, I do it's like 10 minutes of meditation and 20 minutes of yoga, and then there's like a mile or two of dog walking, and that's every day. I reserve hard drinking for once in a while with family usually.
Yeah.
And that's, or family means bands, but like once in a while. So it's like I go pretty light.
Yeah.
And I can't drink. When I stopped drinking for a long time, and then when I started playing with Cracker, especially before David quit, that band would drink.
Yeah.
And I really got into drinking whiskey because that's what those guys drank, and I can't do it. I really can't drink whiskey anymore. which is funny because I go on the road and like, because I was known for years as being like, single malt scotch or whatever.
That's what I remember. Yeah. Macallan's, right?
Yeah. And people keep buying the whiskey. And I was like, well, that's great. I can't really drink hard liquor. My gut just doesn't do it anymore.
I cook with it. I haven't drank in over 20 years at this point, but people occasionally give me a bottle of something. I'm like, oh, I guess they're making Bourguignon, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just like I just can't do it,
Is your back okay now?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm stretching while I'm talking to you, but it's like I have to work it. As long as I kind of stay stretchy and walk. The walking is really what saves me. The meditation and the walking. So it's like the rhythm for me is wake up, make some coffee or make some tea, go back in the bedroom, sit down for 10 minutes, meditate. And I have a pretty concise program that I do, and then do some stretching, and then throw on some shorts and like collar the dog and go out and do a walk. And that walk it's usually 2 to 3 miles, so better part of an hour.
You've always had dogs?
Yeah, I like dogs always. Yeah.
You got one now or more?
One's this guy is too much of he's a rescue, so he's just too much of a bother. He's getting old. He's 11 now, so I got a couple more years. I like dogs because they keep you moving and they get you out of your head.
I just like dogs. I've always had them. So, man, I didn't even get into Patriarch Blues, which I did a bunch of research on, but I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, that's if you want more trauma.
Yeah, well, so we'll touch on that briefly, but there's
good.
I usually do another thing where I do 10 questions at the end, and that's going to take some time too. But Patriarch Blues, of course, is the record you recorded in 2007 because your stepfather and father passed away 3 weeks apart, as I recall. Is that correct?
3 weeks, yeah, 3 weeks to the day, pretty much.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with that record over the last few days because I knew we were going into this, and I think it's a really amazing record.
It's a really cool. I mean, that record is completely live, right? There's nothing there. If my memory serves me correctly, there are actually 2 overdubs. There's one overdub where I harmonized myself, and I forget what the other one was, but there were 2 overdubs on it. We basically went in a studio for 2 days, and we did Bruce Kaplan and I, who Bruce engineered it, and we did a lot of prep. Where we talked about the songs, and I think it was a 7-person band. I basically called in every favor I could, and as far as people being there, and we just went for it. And so everything's live, and it's super visceral as a result. I really am a fan. That's actually like my biggest kind of mourning process right now as an artist is most of the records I've made. Camper can't do it because those guys are just too squirrely. And I made one record where I did a lot of overdubs, but I'm not a fan. I just am not a fan.
Yeah, I don't like taking a year and a half to make a record. And that happens to 5/8 a lot.
No.
I get my parts. I'm in and out of there in 72 hours. And then, I just wait for the record to be finished because it's going to take another year after that.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Buck told me point blank that was one of the biggest tensions for him and R.E.M. was just like he would rather make a record in a week. It's like we'd rather make a record in 18 months. And I'm like, well, I don't know how you resolve that tension because those are completely different mindsets.
Yeah, you just punch out. That's what I do. I get in, I get out. I produced the next to the last 5/8 record, and I thought I'm not doing this again. I was working in a studio. And I just get my parts in done, and I'm gone. I'm gonna let it play out.
Yeah, I served as arbiter between Jonathan and Greg on the last Camper record, and I was I'm very clear. It's I'll never do that again. That's not gonna happen.
I felt like Patriarch Blues. You talk about my first exposure to your work outside of Camper. Well, my first exposure to your work really because I wasn't really deep into Camper until after we got to know each other on the Monks of Doom tour. And that band, songs had movements, it was incredibly structured. As you said earlier in our discussion, it sometimes felt too tight. And then I dropped the needle on Patriarch Blues, and it felt loose and organic, and like you could hear the wood in the room. Like it's a very kind of hardwood and whiskey record. It's very Americana in a way, and I was like, this is a whole different. Like you have a lot of different styles that you can approach with some authority, and I feel like, you know, the Monk stuff was my favorite stuff until I heard Patriarch Blues this week, and now like this is just this. I love this record.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of Monks in it at a certain level, but it's, you know, I decided at a certain point really clearly, maybe 15 or so years ago, in part from knowing Dave Alvin, and really, like I've known Dave a very long time. I think Dave and I have known each other for 35 years, and we toured a lot in the late 80s together. And in a lot of ways, Dave's really, like I was listening to a lot of jazz already at that point, but like Dave really made me listen to John Coltrane in ways I hadn't. And watching Dave, who himself is kind of a frontman, was very awkward when he started, and watching him get more comfortable, and just watching his economy of language and economy of, like, he really, you know, he's got a blues idiom that I don't entirely have. He works in a, I mean, I've gotten him out of his comfort zone working directly with him, and he's been willing to go with me, which I really appreciate. But I guess my what I'm really trying to say is, like, economy. Like, Dave is a really good guy with economy, and you know, Dave's influences are, you know, the blues, like specifically like Big Bill Brinzy, and I mean, you know, he's broad based, but, you know, like certain specific things that I can hear the wrist percolate through him. But also in songwriters, it's like Dylan and Tom Waits and people like Tom Russell, and people who just know how to be economical with words and economical with chords. And I think that was a secret because we were precocious, right? The Monks were a precocious band where you were trying to move your fingers fast and try these hard things. And I was, you know, like listening, you know, to Zappa and King Crimson, and Chris Peterson's like a big Genesis fan. And then I also like the Jesus Lizard in the Fall, and, you know, and like Captain Beefheart was like a big kind of unity thing for a lot of us, and also like Can. And so we had all these weird divergent things, and that band was just like, you know, your imagination is a blank slate, go for it. But, you know, as I began to work more intensely as a songwriter and really hone in more lyrically, more poetically, I don't always think words are supported well by having a lot of movement behind them. I think sometimes you have to get really, like I said, economical about it. And I think Patriarchs is really, you know, there's a record right before it called The Cocktails at Sunrise, which was done in much the same way. But Patriarchs had a thing behind it, which was the event, like the, you know, the deaths of my father and my stepfather. And I just had like this thing. It just happened. It just, you know, like most things creatively for me. But it was also, I think, we covered it a lot by having a lot of musicians in the room, but we did a lot. There was a lot of muting, you know, so we could create arrangements, but we just played it and performed it. And when you perform a song together as an ensemble, you can't touch. You simply can't touch the energy that you can get doing it. I just don't. It's not possible. You know, I mean, and that was really like when we did the Third Mind record. We basically did it in 3 days. You know, and I had these sterling players who just listened and performed. But if, like, you really analyze, like, what's going on, like, we do this Alice Coltrane cover at the top of the record, and, like, you know, the tempo starts, I mean, it's got to shift 10 BPM faster by the end of it. But you would never know listening to it, you know, unless you put the needle at the top and put the needle at the back. And that's the kind of stuff, you know, like, that's the magic of playing. and the magic of, it's why I get really angry with people who don't like their artists to age, because I think age, the one good thing you can really say for it with musicians, I think especially writers, is that, you know, your craft can get much better, much better. And I think like Baker X Blues, you know, I know for people who know that record, it's a thing, and it was intended to be. You know, I really wanted to make an emotional statement about, you know, what it is to confront that kind of loss of a parent. You know,
well, mission accomplished, man. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, it's not. David and I joked that really we're just pursuing the one chord, like the perfect one chord. You know, like it's all we're all headed for a big drone. You know, and I do, like, you know, and the weird thing is, it's like, I just don't, like, I don't really know what my idiom is. Like, I like guitars, right? I like guitars, bass, drums, but I like a lot of weird noises. I usually prefer them when they're kind of organically created, you know, so feedback, guitar loops, tape loops, things like that, versus, you know, made in the computer. But even sometimes made in the computer now, I find it can be pretty cool. I find, you know, I find Americana stifling is really what it's coming down to. I think in the environment, you know, it's like I really, like where we're at, kind of politically and environmentally, it's stifling to me. It's like I want more open, like if you told me I could listen to Sun Ra or Steve Earle, I'd go with Sun Ra in a heartbeat. You know, it's like it wouldn't even be there's no choice in the matter right now. You know, because I kind of feel like, you know, this gets a little cosmic, but I can just kind of feel like Americana is comfortable, right? You know, because like all great American idioms, and like, you know, American music I think it's profoundly some of the most revolutionary art of the last 100-something years. Like, and it really is American music. I mean, you know, the Beatles are American music as far as I'm concerned. You know, it's because it's rooted in stuff that came out of here. But we put it on like a blanket and we make it comfortable. And I think that's where you got to get, like, you know, the kids know, like, that's where we're old people, and the kids know, like, you know, if Radiohead makes you uncomfortable, like, I got no sympathy. Like, we need, like, we got to push out, because that's just kind of where the world is headed. You know, that's kind of our responsibility as artists. So I'm always trying to turn corners, and that was the whole thing with like the Third Mind project with Dave. It's just like, can I get you to turn a corner? And in some ways, we were really embracing kind of 60s style improvisation, but because of the presence of Immergluck and, you know, like Red Panda foot pedals and things that like Immergluck was pulling, that Dave was looking at me like nobody else would. I would not let anybody else get away with this shit in front of me. But that's kind of, I think that's my job, is to take tradition and, you know, I do want to pay fealty to it. Like, I want to give it its due respect, but I don't want it to be static. You know, I don't want to make a Roseanne Cash record. You know, I think she's great. I think her band is fantastic. I think, you know, I mean, I think it's great, but it's too safe, right? Like, I don't believe in that safety as an artist.
Even she listens to Faux Ferocious. Like, she talks about it on her fucking Twitter account, that like she's into punk rock.
No, I know. And I mean, and I think she's made decisions about what she's going to do. I think that's really what to say. And like, I mean, I think her records are astounding. I listen to them and they're beautifully arranged, they're beautifully thought out. You know, and maybe one day I'll want to make a record that's as meticulously and as meticulously well done. But for me, it's like, I just like the chaos a little bit more. It just speaks to me more. You know? And that's, you know, really like this project I'm working on now. Like, you know, it's like I'm sitting around and I'm like, why do I have 4 1960 whatever P basses sitting here? Like, something needs to change. And I just sold one. And my friends were like, you're insane. I'm like, no, because I went and bought like an old Fender 12-string guitar because I just wanted to have a certain voice, a certain ability in the noise-making kind of paintbrush set, because that's all I got right now, right?
Yeah.
You know, I can't use volume, I can't use performance, right, to achieve what I'm trying to do. I got to do it with, you know, tools. So, like, sound is very important to me right now.
Some of the questions that I asked at the end of these interviews get into the tools. So let's jump into that. I usually wind these things up with these 10 questions that are sort of really loosely based on the questions at the end of Inside the Actor Studio, which actually were from actually created by a French radio host named Bernard Pivot.
We used to do. This is funny you bring this up. So, like, we used to do when I worked at Wired, when we had people's birthdays, we would give them the Actor Studios questions, which turned into very very interesting days.
Huh?
Because a lot of my coworkers are like, I'm not answering that question.
I've never really gone through them with an intent to think about my own answers to them, but these questions I came up with. Just sort of, I thought everybody's sort of heard those questions and thought about them. But these are the ones I'm really curious about. So if you're ready for that, we can jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What is the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
You know, that's hard to say entirely, but there would be two. I had a friend in San Francisco who worked at a restaurant called Boulevard. It's kind of adheres to one of the stories I was telling earlier, where we would barter. And it was a Michelin star restaurant, and he used to feed me for free about once every 6 weeks. And the first time he did it, I hadn't eaten a meal like that, I think, ever in my life. And so it stands out as being just... There was like a deep fried quail on, you know, shredded fried onions to start with me, some like balsamic glaze over it. I remember it that distinctly. It was probably 30 years ago that this happened. So that would be one. And then there was the more recent one was David Emmerglick eats at an Italian restaurant in the East Village. And the name of the restaurant escapes me, but the more important thing is that the owner is Sicilian and she smuggles cold cuts back. She smuggles her charcuterie back from Italy, and so it's probably better that we don't name the restaurant. But it was the most profound Italian meal I've had outside of Italy, and just the company was like eating with David Emmerglick is a sublime pleasure in my life. So those are the two that come to my memory straight away.
I remember David being just an incandescently brilliant man to just be around, funny and super creative.
Yep. Yeah, he's super creative, and he's just like he's a, you know, I mean, he's just basically the dude burns bright, and he loves to eat, and eating with him is just, it's a great pleasure. My life would be far less rich simply without the pleasure of having meals with David Emmerglick.
Man, I'd love to get my boots under the same table as both of you guys sometime again. I would love that so much.
Careful what you ask for.
The second question, you can answer it one of two ways. The question has historically been, tell me about the time that you were most frightened that you've ever been. But I had a young woman a punk rock guitar player, someone I admire tremendously, but she's also like even younger than millennial. I would say she's older Zoomer.
Right.
Anyway, she's really young. And I said, "What's the most frightened you've ever been?" And she sort of froze in place. And I thought, oh, this is not always a good question to ask a woman.
Yeah.
Because in our society, often horrible things happen to women. And asking them to talk about it on a fucking podcast is really potentially trivializing a really terrible event. So the question now is, tell me about the time that you were the most frightened you've ever been, or tell me about a time you were braver than you ever thought you could be.
I mean, for me, it's just, I had to, at a young age, hold the hands of people who were dying, which was frightening, but strangely, now that I've done it well more than once, some people can't do it, and I can do it. It's very hard to be in a room when somebody's really exiting the world. And when you learn that you can do it and be present for it, I wouldn't say it's easy, and I don't even know that I would qualify it as brave, but it's certainly the hardest thing I've done, but I think it's also, it's served the most benefit, So
you moved to San Francisco in 1983, and I don't know if at that time you were already, if you were out of the closet or if you...
No, not at that point. I was in Santa Cruz until, actually, I was in Santa Cruz from 83 until...
Santa Cruz. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Santa Cruz from 83 to, I guess I left after the earthquakes, so that's 89. I moved to San Francisco at the end of 1989. No, I was not out until 1989. So I was 24 when I came out.
A lot of people who are younger than you and I don't remember what it was like when we first started hearing rumors of the gay cancer, which was the most common sort of initial symptom that you could see of HIV was Kaposi sarcoma, which was a rare skin cancer that started to, so unheard of that when epidemiologists started to see clusters of it in San Francisco, New York, and Montreal, that they thought this is some kind of weird epidemic, and it turns out that's exactly what it was. But it was this mystery that came creeping up on a population of people that you and I were close to, and then just started killing people left and right. It was absolutely terrifying. And I saw this thing where someone was talking about how Americans were watching an epidemic kill people all around them, and the government wasn't doing anything. And it was like gay men who survived the AIDS crisis. It's that scene from the Coen Brothers Western film where the guy's getting hanged for the second time, and he turns to the guy next to him and he says, "First time."
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, exactly. So I imagine that as a young gay man in San Francisco in the 90s, you saw a lot of people pass from this world to the next.
Every gay man that I knew from where I grew up, from Riverside, because just because I wasn't out doesn't mean I wasn't dealing with it, because I was. They're all dead, and they've all been dead for 25 years. All of them. Not like I'm the only one. Well, I think there's one person I went to high school with who came out later who I think is still alive. But otherwise, they're all dead. So I really literally watched a generation of men my age and a little bit older disappear. It became a lot more profound, because when you're closeted, like anything, you're just in denial about what's really going on. And there was a moment, probably in 1990 or 1991, I remember very distinctly, where I began to understand that, no, this is just going to, this is in my life. Whether or not I have the virus, it's going to directly affect me. And it did. I've had several lovers who've had HIV, and in the early, well, even until the late 90s, it was really, there was a huge divide. Now it's gone. Medication has ended it. And it's profound because it just really, it really changed it. But that's the real. Jonathan felt it to some degree because he was in San Francisco around me, and he lost his mother at the time. But and Greg to some degree, because Greg had a lot of gay friends. But David, like, he went into kind of different world with like where Cracker went, and it's not that it wasn't around them to some degree either, because Hickman lost his brother to the disease. But it's like for me, because it was like my community, right? So that's really always been like I've had a very different kind of take on things, because I don't think you can go through that not be. Like, I got a cousin who's straight who lives in the Castro, and she's lived there for many years. And, like, she and I can talk about it because she went through it. She's 10 years older than me. She's 65 now. And, she went through it. And if you went through it, you went through it. And in relationship to what we're going on with COVID-19, that's the thing that just blows my mind. Because the denial is essentially like the same thing. But what I think people don't understand is like this disease is way more contagious. And look at Florida. It's just like many people I know looked at Florida in like March and April, and we're like, if they keep going the way they're going, they're going to have a huge problem. Well, they have a huge problem. Yeah. And America, for all its beauty and for all the remarkably intelligent people I know here, this culture war is really bad news, and these people are going to suffer from it. They themselves are going to suffer from their behavior.
But we had a Republican president in 1980 through 1988 who also chose not to address this crisis head on.
Absolutely,
there were years before we even had safe sex guidelines for figuring out like how to stop or slow the transmission of HIV.
Don't get me to say, I will not say nice things about Ronald Reagan. I was in Paris when Reagan died, and and I was in the Marais, the gay district of Paris. I was on my honeymoon, actually, and, there was a celebration on the streets in Paris when Ronald Reagan died.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure there were in Latin America, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just like, America's just got blood all over it.
I remember getting my hands on copies of the Village Voice in the late 80s. It was hard to do in South Georgia, and reading like Larry Kramer, who seemed like the angriest man on the planet.
Yeah.
But Larry Kramer was a gay man who lived through the epidemic in New York City and watched the federal government absolutely ignore, or worse, ignore at best.
Yeah.
But also just belittle the suffering of an entire community of people who were dying at an alarming, terrifying rate. And right. I get now why Larry. He just passed recently, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he just died recently. And he gave a pretty solemn interview as COVID was happening, because I think he was seeing ghosts. But yeah, the callousness of what's going on now is profound to me. Because the economy it will not remotely heal until the disease is controlled, and there's no way to control the disease when your identity politics subvert the public health mechanisms that will basically keep the disease is just seeking equilibrium. It's just looking to get like 70% of the population infected. It's just going to do it until it either does it or there's a vaccine to prevent it from happening. So it's just going to cut through the kindling, because it's just what it does. And so if you're not distancing and you're not wearing a mask, then you're kindling. It's that simple. So I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's like, fuck them, let them get it. And, which is a horrible thing to say, but it's like, well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I heard an interview with Steve Albini. I had been bringing him up twice in my interview. It was a little weird, but he was talking about Marin a couple of years ago, and he was talking about how there was only 7 or 8 years between Woodstock and the explosion of the new energy around CBGBs and the punk movement in 1977, 78.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that over and over as we're sort of, it's been 20 years since the suicide of Kurt Cobain, and we're still sort of circling the same bush.
Yep.
I pointed this out to a friend, and he is an amazing, wonderful, vibrant, brilliant, beautiful gay man from Atlanta, and he said, Patrick, we lost a generation of gay men. Art and culture are not going to move forward until that gap is filled in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I entirely agree with that, but I understand the logic behind it. You know, I think it's really, on some levels, it's just because the society's got more conservative than they want their art to be. Like people, like it's what we were talking about earlier. I think people want their art to be a, like a, what is it, like the current trendy anti-anxiety, like a weighted blanket. You know, they want it to be this warm, like heat modulating weighted blanket that's super comfortable and makes it sleepy. And again, I personally don't think art should do that for you, but that's me. I think art should make you uncomfortable, and artists you love who make you comfortable should challenge you by making you uncomfortable at points. I think it's just crucially fucking important that boundaries get pushed, and they're going to get pushed anyways. I mean, what the beauty to me about what's going on with like the BLM protests and just watching, where the kids are is like they know, like they know they're fucks, and they know, like they don't care, and they're not even in our social, like they don't do Instagram like we do it. They certainly aren't even on Facebook at all. Twitter, we're like, fuck that, they exist in a different realm. But like when I talk to people I know who are in their late teens and early 20s, they know everything that's going on in detail.
Yeah.
But they're not participating the way we think they are. And that's troublesome only because people should be voting this year. But it's also very interesting because they know that, it's time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Third question. What is the thing in your life that you've lost that you regret losing the most?
Oh, Jesus. I try hard not to have regrets. But I would say, yeah, there's a relationship that I lost, which was my marriage, actually, that I wish, it was out of my control, but I don't think it had to end, So.
How long were you married?
I was with him for 17 years. So a long time. But a lot of it was not good. So I think in some ways the regret is more that I wasted time when I knew it was not workable and couldn't admit it to myself. So I think that's really technically more it. I don't regret the relationship, and don't really actually regret the end of it because it was a healthier place to be, but I regret the time wasted. That's the only thing. I regret wasting time. David Crosby says time is the only real currency, and he's right. Well, that's the wisest thing David Crosby ever said. Because it is. It's like that's the one thing. It's the one thing you don't want to waste.
I'm going to be thinking about that for a very long time.
Yeah.
Fourth question. Tell me about a time you received an act of kindness from a stranger.
Oh, well, Loretta, when John got hit, that's still the most probably profound one because I didn't know her at all. And she administered to us at a point of great suffering. So I guess John would maybe remember her name. I don't even know if she'd still be around. It's been 25 years. But wherever she was, that was the most profound act of kindness from a stranger that I've ever been a recipient of.
Yeah. I think the power of prayer in the Black community in America is...
Oh, yeah, man. That's, working with African-American musicians is really, you know, I mean, talking about just like profound knowledge, you know, it's just a different, like, you know, I'm from whitey culture where, you know, my dad had good taste in music. We had good records around, but we weren't a musical family. There weren't instruments in the house, right? And a lot of black musicians I've worked with, you know, not only was like everybody sang and they sang all the time, like their whole relationship with their day-to-day life was musical. And, you know, I mean, not that I plan on having children at this point, but if I had a child, the child would be, you know, just infused with music all the time. I think it's so beneficial.
Oh man, my kid has music on 10 hours a day, every day. It's great.
And I think really honestly, if you think about just African American culture surviving what it's been put through, you know, I think you have to have something to lean on.
Yeah.
Just for psychological outlets, and I think that is what, you know, I think to some degree that's what the relationship with music is for us. It's way more life and death, and I think that's really what it should be for most people. I think this kind of white Protestant European relationship, and it's not that it hasn't yielded, you know, it's like I'm a big fan of classical music. I'm a big fan of the classical composition. Right? There's definitely a lot of Western art I think very highly of, but I think the kind of day-to-day, kind of specifically like Anglican, Northern European Protestant, like the kind of removal, that kind of formality, I don't think it does us any good. I think it makes us really uptight.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Brian Blade?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That guy, his father was a minister, his mother was a school teacher, and man, I feel like his quintet or sextet, I can't remember. Every time I've ever seen them, it's just words absolutely escape me to describe how transcendent that band is.
Well, that's playing with Michael Jerome to me. He's like, Michael grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and his mom was a composition teacher, and he grew up playing in the church. And I think he was playing with his mom. He was playing drums with his mom when he was 5.
Yeah, I have a great Michael Jerome story.
Oh yeah.
Well, so I went to see Richard Thompson here in Atlanta. Michael was playing drums. I know Michael from Dallas. Like,
sure, yeah.
We've known each other a really long time, and there was a drummer from another really, really successful indie rock band who is, in my mind, like he's the sort of John Bonham of post-punk, post-hardcore, and he had always been like the bar. Like, this is the guy that keeps me awake at night. Like, you know, since the death of Jerry Fuchs, there's like one drummer that worries me, and it's this guy. Like, I'm never going to catch this guy. And so I grabbed Michael and I said, we're going to go see this guy's playing with his old band that I used to see in Atlanta. We're going to go, but you got to understand that I'm probably going to get way up in my head because this guy intimidates me so much. And we went to see the show, and we stood there watching it, and I thought to myself, either I got better or this guy got worse, you know, because There was a moment where I was watching it thinking, we're on the same level now. But Michael, after the show, like I'm unavoidably way up in my head, like, wow, something has really shifted here. And he throws his arm around me and he says, "You got this, dude."
Yeah. And
it was just such a good feeling, man. I was like,
yeah,
I love this guy so much.
Oh, dude, he is. As Amber Brooks said, he's just the best. And that's like, I mean, I've worked, you know, just like Mike Urbano, John Haynes, Chris Peterson. I mean, name a number of drummers I've worked with. Pete Thomas, just like, you know, I mean, mind blowing. And Michael's just kind of Don Heffington. I mean, just on and on. Michael just, there's something about the weave that he does when he records. It's really something. His percussion work woven in with like the oddball kind of trap kit, and then the kind of playful ridiculousness of like, I'm just going to throw this gourd on top of the floor tom just to hear how it resonates.
Yeah. And,
you know, it's kind of maddening sometimes because if you're trying to cut between takes, you know, it's like the drum, like he's completely reaching the snare between. It's just like that snare does not sound. So he's like, yeah, I brought it up like 2 whole steps. I was like, all right. Yeah. But Pocket, man, it's like
he's a deep listener.
Oh yeah, he's a deep listener, and he's like his execution. Like I've done a lot of editing of Michael's playing in the last couple of years, and you know it's seamless. Like editing some drummers in Pro Tools, if you're going to go down that road, you really like please save me. But he is just it's like a breeze. So he's an angel. Although you know,
Great guy.
It always depends, you know. Like if you need a certain straight backbeat, there are other people I think I would maybe call first. But like if I just want like vibe, he's usually the first call these days.
Yeah. What's your favorite place to gig, Victor?
Chicago usually. Chicago's always been kind of astounding for me. St. Louis is weirdly always been really good for almost everything I've brought to it. I don't know if it's because of the family connection or what, but just like it always seems to click. In Northern California, any place pretty much in Northern California. But it'd be if I had to really choose, it'd be Chicago, Northern California.
Any particular club in any of those places that you have fondest memories of?
My favorite place in the world just closed recently. Like a lot of places are closing. This place called Armando's. It was in a town called Martinez, California, which is just on. It's in East Bay, and it's on the mouth of the Sacramento, where the Sacramento River meets the San Francisco Bay. And
you're not the first person to mention Armando's on this podcast. Is that the place that's owned by like former Deadheads?
Well, it'd be this guy. I wouldn't be surprised if I never really discussed the Dead with Roy, but it would not surprise me if Roy was a Deadhead. It was a real mom and pop shop, and I mean, I think it seated 100 people, and it'd be like plastic lawn chairs. And the sound man always would scream at me for being too loud. Always. And I was just like, just let it, just don't. Let's not even have a conversation. Tilt back the amp and point it at my head. And yes, I play loud, but I think of shows I played where I just felt like complete unity. Man, that really was the zone. I had the scene going with my solo band when I was still in the Bay Area. We played there about once every 3 months. We just got this really good following of people who just like to come and see live music. And it was, $10, $12 door charge. Always sold a ton of merch, and they passed the tip jar. And I never walked out of there without a grand. I'd walk in feeling like death and walk out feeling like, the world had shifted under my feet.
Yeah. Income and visa considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
Well, if I really had my druthers, I'd live in West LA. That would be the preference. But
really? What are the neighborhoods in West LA? Because I don't know LA that well.
Well, I mean, I just anything from. I mean, I just basically virtually any place from like Glendale out to what is classically West LA, just before the 405, before Santa Monica. Like if I could really afford it, that's where I'd live. But LA is just impossibly expensive. But it's got, I mean, for my money, as much as I love New York, and if I had a lot of money, New York would maybe be a close second. LA, culture in LA is just, you cannot beat it, and you just can't do it. You know, it's got the best, literally the best performers of everything are there. If they're not there, they're in New York.
Yeah.
London and Berlin are very high up on the list, as is actually Stockholm, although Stockholm's not as dynamic artistically. It's a really fantastic town, but I adore Portland. I love it. It's because it's bikeable and it's neighborhood friendly, and it's just filled with great musicians and good thinkers. It's a pretty magic place.
I got some really lovely friends in Portland, and another friend of mine is moving there very soon. So
yeah, I'm very, very happy with the decision to go up there, and it's like really, like if I could make LA work economically, I would definitely choose it, but I just can't. I can't live where I want to live and make it work. It's just I can't make the money to do it. I mean, I could, but I'd have to give up my life to do it, and I'm just too old. I'm too old to make that decision. So.
Yeah. Do you have a perfect, ideal musical instrument, and if so, do you already own it or not?
I do. I have a 1959/60 cusp year precision bass with a rosewood neck that is. You can take almost everything else away from me, but that thing is perfect.
What's the finish on the body?
It's a sunburst finish with a tortoiseshell pickguard. It's first year tortoiseshell pickguard. And
original pickups or not?
It's all original. Nothing's been changed on it but the frets.
Jesus Christ! What is something like that appraised at? It's insured, right?
Yeah, it's 12 now probably. I bought it for $2,000, which was a fortune 20-something years ago. And it's just God, that thing, like, you know. And I mean, I have a lot. I do actually own a lot of guitars. That's one thing I've done with my money, buy a lot of guitars, and I have a lot of quite nice instruments. I've got like a 65 Strat, and, you know, like a really good custom shop telly. I've got I got a Loudon acoustic guitar, which is what Richard Thompson plays, actually, or Loudon.
Yeah.
And I've got a really good J200, really, really good J200. Got a lot of nice stuff, but like of things that just like literally every time I plug it in, any session I'm on, people are like, "What is that?"
Is the J200 is that a Martin acoustic?
It's a Gibson.
Gibson. Okay, I don't know the acoustics that well.
Yeah, and you know, I got a lot of nice stuff. But that's the thing. It's got mojo. I just, you know, and every great bass player I know who's picked it up is just like, if you die, you could leave this to me.
Yeah.
You know, like Davey Farragher and you know, like Brad Fordham and you know, Bob Glaud have all like touched it, and those guys are all like profound players to me, and they're like, this is fantastic. So
I think that the Fender bass is just a remarkable machine. Every part on it has a purpose, and it does the thing so well. I can reach out with my left hand and touch my mid-70s jazz bass, which is right here, and it weighs a ton. It's not.
That's what the 70s are. The 70s are heavy. You know?
Yeah, it's not. Both of my Fenders that I play all the time, my Telly weighs a ton, my jazz bass weighs a ton, and yet somehow they're the first guitars I reach for when it's time to do something. So,
yeah, I have two Telecasters. I have one, and it's like a pretty old, like 80s full Scotch kind of Keith Richardsy, and it's uncomfortably heavy. But you know, you can like hit a chord on it and walk into the next county, and it'll still be ringing.
That's something I've noticed about my heavy Telecaster. It's got ridiculous sustain.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous resonance in them. They're really something, but I don't like playing that guitar live because it's just too heavy.
Do you take the 59 on the road ever, or is it just studio only?
I have. Actually, that's not true. I do I do when I know I can be with it all the time. So I would do it. I like West Coast runs. I'll play it live for sure if I know I can be with it all the time.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't travel with it. I do actually stupidly. I have a 65. That's a really, really good. It's very light and very resonant. It's got really good kind of woody sound. And, I usually record with flatlines, but often I mostly play with rounds. It's kind of just the rounds work a little better for the older stuff. And I will tour with that 65, but it doesn't, it's like it's been refinished and it doesn't have an original pickup in it. And, so it's not quite, it's not exactly a completely vintage instrument. It's definitely a player's thing, but it's got a Fralin pickup in it, and it's really good, man. That thing, I got 3 fantastic precision basses, so it's like it's hard to argue.
It sort of brings me to my next question, which is there an instrument that you've lost either from theft, having to pawn it, having to sell it, that you desperately wish you could get back?
Oh yeah, I had a 1969 P bass that I bought for $600 in LA from a guy who had stopped being a studio bass player to be an animator. And I bought it, I think, in 98, something like that. And that was my main live bass from the time I bought it. I played it all the time. And he had done the 1970s thing where he'd strip the finish. So he stripped it with a belt sander. So the contours were a little off, but it looked really good. Some of those 70s refinishes like that, they look kind of, but it looked good. It really looked good because he put a varnish on it that took this dark patina to it. So it wasn't too woody. It was kind of dark. And, man, that thing, that was just the bass. And it got stolen in Montreal with all our gear. And Music Cares gave me a 69 P bass, and that's what I just sold, actually, to make up for it. And that was a really good bass. But, when the Monks started touring for the Bronte Pen, we got together in LA and rehearsed for a couple of days, and I brought all the P basses down. Just to kind of ABM, and it just didn't sonically hold up. There's something in the line to the pickup, and it just didn't have the clang, or it just, it just didn't have the thing. I mean, some people played it and were like, "This is the best bass in the world." And I'm like, I don't know, it just didn't sing, and the other 69 just did. So, I sold it and bought that Fender 12, and that Fender 12 is pretty fucking magic. So,
yeah. Is the Fender 12 an older guitar? Or?
Yeah, it's a 66. It's the old, it's like the Pete Townsend Fender 12-string guitar. Pete Townsend, Jimmy Page, Tom Petty. Yeah. But, man, that thing has been, I've needed a 12-string for a while, and it's really... I do all this ultimate tuning stuff, and it's really going. It's perfect.
So the next question has historically been, if you could be a guest artist with any performer for one song, living or dead, who would it be? But I'm also toying with the idea of making the next question. Someone points a gun at you and says, "Victor, play the best thing you've ever done." So you could pick whichever of those questions.
So... point a gun at me and say, perform the best thing I've ever done.
Or play it if it's recorded.
Shit. I don't know. I think I'm working on this 16-minute 2-movement thing with Michael Jerome playing drums. It's nothing but crazy alternate tune guitars, and I feel pretty good about that right now. So if you pointed the gun at me right now, I would probably play play that. I mean, if you just wanted me to back up like ability, I would just say come see the Monks play, because that's that. And if I could play on stage with anybody, I would Pete Townsend, no questions asked. Like, just the dude's energy is, I don't know. He's just I've seen him many times going way back, and I just read that Entwistle book, and talk about a miserable fucking group of people. I never ever really want to be in the Who, but I saw Pete play solo at the Berkeley Community Auditorium, and it was just like the energy, man. It's like Bob Mould. Bob Mould's got this really impressive energy, but Bob just doesn't have the finesse that Pete has. Pete's just he's a ballet dancer. Like Bob's like a bull in a china shop, and I love Bob both as a person and as a player.
Yeah.
But Pete, man, there's just nobody who touches him to me. It's just, and as far as performer, I've never seen anybody touch him.
Is there a particular song?
It's all that Empty Glass solo record. That's the stuff that I really think where he and Quadrophenia, it's just,
those are both records where he's really getting some shit out. Like, that dude had profound trauma.
He's a wreck, for both those records. Yeah. But that rhythm guitar playing, I mean, it's just, he's been such a huge influence on my rhythm guitar playing for sure. I just, but yeah, just to be, I would play bass for him in a heartbeat,
It's funny how much R&B comes through in his rhythm playing too. It's a lot of those sixth harmonies, like in Won't Get Fooled Again. And it's just like the intro to Soul Man, the Steve Cropper guitar line. Like, it's over and over. There's these little sly references to Stax Records and Atlantic R&B in Pete's playing, which I think it gets past most people.
Yeah, well, it does, but it's all, he and Steve Cropper both, it's all like the suspended chord, and the augmented and the diminished, like Townsend, it's like he's not really, I don't love his lead playing that much. I mean, he's perfectly competent, but it's like you want lead guitar, let's go get Richard Thompson, because that's the dude, who's going to really set the hairs on the back of your neck up, or like you venture like Jim Campbell or whatever. I mean, I know lead guitar players, there are plenty of people I would choose over Pete, but as far as a rhythm player and the sophistication of the chord structures, he's a fucking genius. I mean, he is, and just the fact that, I hate performing, but I'm very good at it. And it's like, fine, hate it, but you are very good at it. He's really good at it.
Yeah. Last question. If you can imagine a taxi that can go anywhere in time or anywhere in the world, and it's not constrained by sort of normal physics, you climb into this taxi and you say to the cab driver, "Hey man, take me home." Where is home?
Big Sur in about 1948.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like no questions. Like Big Sur post-war, pre-1960. Yeah. Big Sur from about right after World War II until 64. I think it started going a little south. But even then, the Carmel Valley and that area. I mean, that's where Richard Farina wound up. That's where he died. But Big Sur was just a freaky, weird, I mean, it's where Arthur Miller lived, it's on the coast, and it's redwoods, and there wasn't a road into it until the WPA built this bridge. I forget, it's a famous bridge. You've seen photographs of it, I'm sure. But the bridge wasn't built until 37 or so. So it just, there was this organic, creative culture that came out of Big Sur that it's just, I mean, yeah, man. And so I knew this guy, his name escapes me. Gay artist. He was I'll have to look it up because I actually have a piece of his art. And he moved. He was a commercial artist in Los Angeles, and he and his lover moved there in, I think, the late 40s or early 50s. Emil Norman is his name, and they built this house on this bluff on the west side of Highway 1 that is one of the most magnificent private pieces of art I have ever seen. We're talking heavily Japanese influenced architecture, hand-hewn wood inside the house, built a pipe organ. They built a pipe organ by hand, and this guy just made beautiful art, a lot of animal studies, did a lot of stuff with sawdust and color. It's fantastic kind of earth tone palettes, and just super do-it-yourself inspirational shit. And it's just economically, there's no way you could ever pull it off again. I don't know anywhere you could afford to pull it off again. It was a time and place because, simply put, the raw wood would be too expensive and the land would be too expensive. And I don't know any place where you could have that raw material other than maybe there might be some places in Oregon and Washington that would be close. But even those are too expensive now. It's just literally, it was a time and place where you could accomplish certain things artistically simply actually based on the environment of the surroundings, and you couldn't do it again. And not a lot of people know about Emil. The house is still in private hands. It's still in family hands, but we talked to his nephew, and he allowed us to come and tour the house and buy a piece of art, which was, talk about a meaningful day for me. That was really quite something.
You've given me a whole rabbit hole to go down with this. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, he did the stained glass in the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. That's probably his most famous piece of art. But and there's a great documentary on him somewhere. It might be on YouTube now. But really, impossible to replicate. So if you could put me in a taxi cab and take me back to that, I'd do it, because it's just one of those things that could never happen again. Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's been a remarkable conversation, and I'm really, really pleased.
Yeah, it's fun to talk. I can talk. I can talk a blues streak. So.
Yeah. Well, man, thanks so much.
Yeah, man. Good to hear from you, and thanks for the time.
All right, that's episode 62. Victor Krummenacher, what a great guy. Super, super, super talented guy. Also super insightful. And, man, I can't wait till we can hang out together again. He comes to Athens every now and then to do cracker stuff and camper stuff. And, man, I hope we get to grab a meal or something one day in the future after all this bullshit is over. Thanks to Jake Krager. Jake and I talk a lot about the show. He's basically the producer of the show. He sends me show notes after most of the shows and helps me kind of stay on track. He was the first guest ever for the show, and ever since then he's been helping make it better. If the show's better now than it was the first time you heard it, that's all due to Jake. Thanks, Jake. I also want to thank Gene Wolfolk and the band The Powder Room. They provided all the music that you hear on the show, the intro, the bumper, the music under my voice right now is all from the band The Powder Room, which you can find at thepowderroom.bandcamp.com. They're an extraordinary band of very talented musicians, and I'm very grateful that they let me use their music. You should throw them a few bucks as a way of showing some appreciation. Also, Gene has a new band, a real departure from his sort of noise rock roots. He's doing a sort of dream pop, synth pop thing with Erica Strout, the singer from Motherfucker. It's called Dream Tent. Go to dreamtent, DREAMTENT.bandcamp.com and check that out. Man, what an amazing pivot they have made, and what beautiful music they're making together. I can't even tell you how happy and excited I am for them and for everybody who gets to hear that music. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/crashandride and sign up for a $5 or $10 monthly contribution, or you can buy merchandise off our website at crashandridepodcast.com. I'm going to continue to provide every episode for free for as long as I can, because I don't feel like you should be gatekeeping people's access to mental health care. So, help out if you can. I'd really appreciate it. In the meantime, thank you for listening. I hope you're hanging in there. I hope you're finding ways to keep your head above water in the bizarre year that we're having, 2020. I had a band practice yesterday, outdoors with masks, socially distanced, lots of fans. And by fans, I mean the things that spin and push air, and not lots of people. And it was like going to therapy. That was so good. You can, go to 5/8's Facebook page, I think we have, and then I think there might be an archive of the live stream if you want to see me play drums. It was really cool. Had a good time. But until we speak again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help if you need it. Try to find some way to get some live music in your life, whether it's an internet stream, or if you can go to a band practice where you're socially distanced and being safe, do that. But support your favorite band. And remember, loud guitars save lives.